This is the School Success Podcast, a podcast for school leaders to learn from other school leaders what's working and what's not, and to get inspiration and encouragement, as well as strategies to grow school enrollment, connect with families, retain teachers, recruit teachers, and everything in between. You guys are heroes, and I cannot thank you enough for pouring into this next generation that's coming behind us. My goal is you will take at least one thing away from every episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. Please enjoy the School Success Podcast.
Time for school.
Hey, School Success Makers. Welcome to another edition of the School Success Podcast. I'm your host, Mitchell Slater. I'm joined by a new friend out of San Antonio, Texas, Mike Zavada, and he specifically is the founder and chief strategist of RoundTable Education Consulting, working specifically with schools to help them with strategy. And I can have him, of course, dive into that when I pass it off to him here in a minute, but super stoked to have him. We're going to do a little bit of a different format today. Instead of just kind of like the regular questions I will ask, we're going to kind of dive into AI. AI is a big hot topic in our world right now, specifically with some new releases of some different companies that have come into the space. And we kind of want to look at what does that look like in the school world for you administrators who are dealing with grading papers and kids possibly using AI. We're going to kind of dive into all that and get both of our takes and opinions on it. And again, a little bit different of a format. So we'd love y'all's feedback after this episode. You, of course, can let us know your comments or reach out on social and let us know what you think. But so I don't take any other time away from Mike, I'd like to pass it off to him to introduce himself. So Mike, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Thank you, Mitchell. It's a pleasure to be here. It was great to meet you up in the hill country with some other educators, and happy to work with you and share some thought. But this ChatGPT is taking off, so it's really interesting.
Yeah, man. And I'm looking forward to diving in because I actually haven't even had a conversation like this with somebody yet. Internally as a team in my company, we've talked about it and where we think it's going. But I guess before we dive into that, I always love to make tiny bit of small talk with the guests and go, hey, you're in San Antonio. If I ever came to San Antonio, what would you be like? Mitchell, you got to do this when you come to San Antonio.
Oh, wow. Well, I think take a bike ride on the Riverwalk down to the Missions. My family and I just did that last weekend, and it's gorgeous. And then there's a whole area called Prince William where you could stop and have ice cream or adult beverage or just some tapas or something good, something San Antonio flavor, Tex-Mex.
Okay. Sounds like a plan. I love it. So before we dive into also AI, I'd love to just kind of get your background. So people that are listening, they kind of know who Mike is, what your background is. So kind of get me to where you are today.
Yeah, I've been working in independent schools for most of my adult life after coaching some college basketball. And I still coach today, but started in a great school in Miami called Palmer Trinity and was a dean of students and did some college counseling, and then moved to Honolulu, which my wife and I were teachers there at a large school called Punahou. It's pretty famous, and we noticed a lot of technology there. So it's kind of where I got the start of kind of being an early adopter of some technology, because the Asian population in Hawaii had things first because they were getting them from relatives in China and Korea and places like that, and Japan. And so from there went to Alabama, which was a great place, Huntsville, Alabama, but it's not normally known as being advanced, but Huntsville had the largest concentration of PhDs anywhere. Taught a lot of rocket scientists kids, and so had to be on a cut above there. And then as a principal for middle and high school at a 1-to-1 school. And also, it's really when a lot of the social media was taking over and things like that. We had to be a step ahead of the game. And so it kind of got me to the topic today of how a school is defined or defines itself would help it with its reaction to something like ChatGPT. I think New York City schools recently voted or just made a mandate that it wasn't going to be allowed in schools, it wasn't going to be allowed on their servers. And so that seems like a knee-jerk reaction. I don't know what went into that decision, but each school, and generally I work with private schools, so it's a little bit easier, a little bit smaller of a control group, should base the decision on whether to use or not use or how it limits something like AI based on its mission and the type of school it is. And I'd love to talk a little bit about, there's 4 different types of schools based on my learning and some folks at Oasis and some curriculum management stuff that I've studied. And either you believe the knowledge is transferred from the teacher to the student, so that's kind of the scholar academic kind of school, the traditional, what we think of as a traditional school. I was in one of those just recently for 2 years as the COO of Geneva School in Burney as a classical Christian school. And that's that model. There's a model where it's an efficiency-based model where you'll see a lot of testing. And so trying to take this group of students up this rank of a criterion. There's knowledge transfer there and then knowledge out. So in and outputs, that's kind of the left side of the spectrum and pretty more traditional. On the right, in the top right, if you're looking at a quadrant, would be a student-centered, student inquiry-based model. And that's where student interests are the key part. And so if you took something like ChatGPT, you might say, hey, this is a great tool for students to look at and to use, and let's see where it's going to go. Because the end outcome is not to have really rigid standards, it's to see how students where they would take the tools that they have. And then the bottom right quadrant, if you were looking, would be one that's probably taking over a lot of schools now, and that's kind of a social justice initiative, a reconstruction of what learning structure should be based on equity and fairness. And they might take the ChatGPT tool and say, is AI making a more just world or a less just world? And what is the inputs in that? And so just a frame. Oasis is a group that I've done some work with and partnered with as a school leader. That's OESIS, and they've been really good at kind of sharing with schools. There are about 600 partner schools across the country who look at these things, and they're looking at ChatGPT, but they're looking at things across the board and trying to get schools, and even how you hire people at a school, like teachers, what is the lens through which they look at how teaching and learning is taking place, and based on that lens, is it a fit for the school?
Okay. And just to bring up the audience into where we're talking about, for those that are like, oh, I've heard of AI, it's artificial intelligence, but they were like, what's ChatGPT? Those, obviously you guys can Google it, ChatGPT. It's the parent company, it's probably 2 parent companies, but OpenAI, you'll see that pop up. They're one and the same. And it's just a software. You guys can literally, it is super smart, where you can tell it kind of anything and it's going to give you an article. So you could, just to give you guys an example, because I've played around in it, you can go, hey, write me a love poem for my wife. I didn't do this, by the way. I just tested it. I didn't use it, okay? But I said, well, write me a love poem for my wife about how we met when we were teenagers and went to this school and met at church. Like, you can give it all these details and say, keep it under 500 words. And it'll put out a poem rhyming. It'll rhyme this poem about with you and whoever you want it to do. It'll do that. It can write blog posts, social media posts, but you can talk to it like you talk to a person and give it ideas. And I wrote something, I tested it out with different styles of language, and I asked it to write it in Old English form, and it did that in Old English form instead of just how we talk today. It was very old school, and I was like, oh my gosh. So it's super crazy. So I know schools, there's some worry that popping up, if our kids are going to use this to write their essays. And yes, I think it's definitely going to happen. But from what I've found, and I'd love your take on this, Mike, from when I've seen it, it's great, but it's not perfect. Like, there's still some things I go in there like, it didn't word that correctly. Like, you can tell it's not right, and it's close, but it's just not right. So you still have to go in there and kind of tweak some stuff, but they're crazy, scary good at how it is. But kind of what's your take on the quality of it?
Yeah, I've only worked on it a few times, looking at it. Basically been more looking at the analysis. But when I put it in, the things that don't come up necessarily are citations. So if you're a writer and you have to have citations, it may not work. If you don't have to have citations and you're just doing something quick, it might work. I listened to a podcast yesterday, and there was a professor on there saying how she used it, and she was using it to take some writing that she had and put it through there kind of as an editing tool. And that's probably a good use case. And like, that gets back to the school thing, thinking through, If I'm in an English department at a school, high school English department, and I want to teach editing skills, I might take a piece of writing that I had and then plug it through ChatGPT and decide, look at the suggestions it makes. A little bit like Grammarly. Again, many in our audience probably use Grammarly. Well, is that AI or not? And I think it is. And is that an acceptable use for a student? 15 years ago, it would not have been. Maybe 5 years ago, it would not have been. Probably in most schools today, teachers are recommending maybe using something like Grammarly. But it comes from OpenAI, and our listeners probably will see many news articles today because Microsoft just invested or bought it for $10 billion, according to a news report I saw yesterday. I actually saw it today, but it happened yesterday.
Dang, I hadn't even seen that yet. Now I got to Google it while we're talking live here. So that's crazy. That is nuts. So it's powerful. So in kind of your personal opinion, what would you say, how should a school handle it? You think, how should parents handle it if there are students in the house and they're like, I want to use this AI to help me write this paper or whatever? Do you think it's a yes and no, or it's a bit middle line, you use it for ideas? Because we've used it internally for we get stuck on something I can't come up with another idea for this. And they give you just 10 ideas. And you're like, oh, let's use that one.
Here's, I think, some of education at many of our schools is process oriented. You're having students go through a process for the first or second or third time they've ever done it. So we kind of remember being a sophomore, junior in high school and writing our first term paper, right? So if you were going to go and use ChatGPT for the first time to write your term paper, that obviously would be a tremendous loss of the learning opportunity, right? But if you are in a situation where you've got to write a lot of things and you have to write it very quickly and you need to get some different ideas, it might be a good use. Again, it would depend on the kind of school you're at too. If you were at an innovative school that wasn't as concerned about the execution of the writing, but more the ideas behind it, and you as the originator had some great ideas and were plugging it into ChatGPT, the ideas, and they just came out with the format and the language for you, that might be acceptable. So it depends on your role. I imagine at a school, and you work with the advancement teams of schools, like admissions and development, people marketing the school, it's probably being used by several schools across the country, and that would be fine, right? Somebody was doing their job. But now, what would happen, and this is the advice for bosses, supervisors, parents, teachers, if ChatGPT, which it won't be, isn't coming through authentically as you, then it's really not valid and it's not good for you, right? So if you're plugging something in and it comes out and you submit that and it's not authentically you, then you've done a disservice to yourself and to the receiver. So let's take college essays. Gratefully, most students right now are done their college essays and they're about hearing, where they've gotten into. So I'm certain that some students this year, even applying to Ivy League schools, have written their essays through ChatGPT. They're not going to be authentically theirs, right? So that wouldn't be a good use case, but it would help them do them quicker. If their essay wasn't important to them getting in, it was just a check off that the school was making them do, then it might be a good use for them, although it might be deemed unethical or unhonorable, this is all changing, right? Because of artificial intelligence and what you can create. It, having been at schools that have had honor codes, it brings up this whole new, what's the definition of honor? Is using a tool like that honorable or not? Just like some have said, is using a calculator to do your math problems in the past good, or is using Cliff Notes, like some have used in English in the past, is that an ethical use? And so you have all these. And again, depending on where you fit on the school paradigm, you may say it's okay or absolutely not, depending on what quadrant you're in.
What quadrant are you in, Mike?
Good question. Well, I've been at 5 schools, and I would say I've probably been in each quadrant. So last school, classical Christian, would definitely be in that scholar academic knowledge transfer. And there's definitely points to be made there. I think I've thrived in that because I love reading and I love writing. The schools I've worked with as a consultant, a lot of them have been in the student-centered quadrant, where student inquiry was really important and they were trying to solve real-world relevant problems. And so I think, use of ChatGPT is probably really a good use case there. So for instance, I was working in a school where 6th and 7th graders were working on an environmental problem. They were trying to save the beaches, and it blended math and science and English skills because they had to write this proposal, and some ethical skills like, decisions. I wouldn't see, and that school wouldn't have, if it was a project-based learning school, wouldn't have thought twice about having students type something in like that into ChatGPT to get some language that they would later put in. But if in the classical Christian school, the end-all product is the senior thesis, the senior capstone thesis. And this is the last school I was at, a 20-minute presentation on a controversial topic that you write the paper for, and then you recite the paper word for word from memory. It's a really amazing display when the seniors do that. And these are all kinds of topics. This would be a great topic I'm sure that somebody's doing, whether or not this is an ethical use. But if they put their paper, this idea, and had ChatGPT write their paper, they would have probably done a disservice to their whole K through 12 education.
It's going to be interesting as time goes on because it's only going to get better. Because I know there's been AI stuff out there for years, and they were okay. Like I've played around with them before, but when I heard about ChatGPT last year and I was playing with it, I just was laughing. I was like, this is ridiculous. Like what the thing can do. My friend took it and gave it all this different information, and it created a website for him with code. So he took the code and put it in. It was a working website with the code that it spit out for him.
Wow. And that was free open source?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. It's kind of like limitless. Like obviously if you ask inappropriate bad things, it will say it can't do those things, but the kind of sky's the limit. So, I think what we're going to see is our culture. I think as it's kind of going forward, I think that things are going to kind of be a little iffy is people who are using it to write full-on books. Like later on, it's like they just had the software write these books, they publish them, and maybe it's good, maybe it's bad content, but it's obviously not that person. So I think that's what we're going to also run into is that as it gets better and better, because all it's doing right now, it's learning. It's going to get better, and they're going to make it better. It's currently free. I don't think that's going to be the case very, very long, and it's going to be probably pretty expensive to use that software. So we will see.
Well, I think what you're talking about with the books and that as authenticity, right? I think humans have an innate ability to understand, to sense authenticity, right? So if there's a generated book, AI generated book, people are going to sense that. The podcast that I was listening to on AI the other day and about ChatGPT, the guest had all of her answers prepared, and so it sounded as if, to me, she was reading her answers almost from a script, right? And so while she was very educated, had great answers, I lost some respect for that because it didn't seem authentic. And so that's part of the conversation. I want to share one other use case of AI that I think is very, very helpful in schools. And some people like Alex.com, not people, but groups. Alex.com is a math site that can take diagnostics through using AI on student learning and move students along toward mastery much quicker. So when we're going through school, maybe we had 30 math problems to do. You do 1 through 30 odds and evens, right? And you have to go through, and even if you got it, the concept on the 6th math problem, you still had to do the 30 to get credit for the homework at most schools, right? Well, Alex works a little bit different. If in the first 6 problems you show that you've got no problem, it moves you on. And that's using AI and diagnostics to figure out where the student should be. And we piloted some use cases of that at a school where I was principal at Trinity. And it was really good because the student didn't have to be stuck in where they were. If they were behind, they could be doing problems and getting successful and building up that foundation without the fear factor of failing right away. And if they were way ahead and maybe they were placed in the class because that's what the schedule allowed, but they really could do more, they could go on and get the credit for the higher course. And so there's other use cases to AI that I think are really helpful in education.
Love it. And I know some concerns that people have brought up is AI going to replace jobs, replace people's jobs like copywriters or people who write articles for the newspaper. I mean, you could literally give it something and it's going to shoot out an article for a news release or something. And in my opinion, at least at the moment, again, it's always going to get better. Even if you have it write something, you still need somebody who knows grammar and knows content to review it and give tweaks here and there or give feedback or whatever, because you can't just trust it at this point. I feel like I could never get to that point of like, let me have it publish this 2,000 word article and I'm just going to take whatever it gives me and publish it without reading through it and making sure the things that it's telling are facts. It's not like pulling just random stuff and saying it's true. Like, so there's still got to be like research that has to be done and people going to tweak words. Again, I feel like when you read it, some of the sentences you just can pick up on going, this, like you guys said, Mike, it's not authentic. It feels like there's something different and people are really good at, I feel like, seeing through that at the moment. So we will see.
Yeah, I think, thinking about reading the newspaper growing up and that sports writer, I was big into sports, but that sports writer who was really good at taking some of the historical parts of the team and applying it to what he was seeing in the current day and nicknames and things like that. The old sports writers would come up with nicknames, and I'm not sure that AI is going to have that ability to turn a phrase, to come up with nicknames, to use metaphor well. That would be interesting to see. And that's a great discussion, I think. Let's say you have a junior AP English language class. Some of the best teachers I ever saw were in those classes at my various schools. And they would walk through with students, maybe in this concept today with ChatGPT. All right, here's an essay not written with ChatGPT. Here's one that is. Pick out these figures of speech, whether or not which one has more. And do we like figures of speech? A lot of times when we're using formal writing, you probably shouldn't use so many figures of speech, but yet as a reader, I like figures of speech, because if with a quick metaphor or simile, you can tell me exactly what I should be sensing without having to spell it all out through multiple sentences, that's really cool. And I don't know that ChatGPT will be able to do that.
Man, time will tell. And I thought for fun, since we're on this live podcast, I pulled it up too. We can just do something for fun real quick. So I think having a poem. So I'm going to tell ChatGPT, we'll do this together, Mike. So write me a children's poem about give me an animal, Mike, any animal.
Platypus.
Oh, good one. Platypus. Okay, I'm going to say rhyming just to make sure it doesn't give me just a regular poem. Write me, okay. Let's see, a rhyming children's poem about a platypus who, give me something a condition he has. It doesn't have to be like bad, just like something he's different.
Different.
A platypus who looks like a giraffe.
Okay.
We're going to give it something really crazy. It looks like.
Better not make this a limerick.
All right. Write me a rhyming children's poem about a platypus who looks like a giraffe and is the color pink. All right. I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to see if it gives me anything. Give it a few seconds to think. It did tell me that they have very high demand right now for ChatGPT, which is very, very true. So I'll see if it gives me anything worth sharing. I think this will be really fun too for people who are like for fun gifts for a family member, like, hey, I wrote you a funny poem, and they like just made something up really quick like this, like giving a kid something really funny. Or maybe, they're going to bed and they're like, hey, what you want to have a story? What do you want the story to have tonight? And the children can share, like, want a platypus who's pink and has a, and then have it write a story. Like, there's so many fun things you could also do with it. Doesn't always have to be bad or anything. So
Yeah.
it's telling me that it's telling me it's overloaded right now with requests from the whole world. So we're gonna have to be probably disappointed here, everybody. I'll try it again while we're talking, because I know we're gonna wrap up here soon. But I guess, Mike, on the AI thing, any final things before I ask you my final question?
Well, I think the best thing, as I think about the faculties that I've worked with, you could take a concept like this and have a robust discussion with the faculty about it, hear all the perspectives about it, whether it's that kindergarten teacher and that use case that you just mentioned with the platypus, or the AP highbrow English teachers, and get those on the table with the lens of what kind of school you are, with your mission and your vision and your outcomes for the students, and kind of come up with a game plan on how to use it. And maybe it's different by each, but I also think it's important that schools have some language in their handbook that addresses it. And so it's very similar to whether or not, cell phones can be used in the classroom,
Yeah.
and those kind of things. A lot of times when you're in a hurry as a school leader and feel like this is another fire to be put out, but I think it's a lot of times a really good opportunity to practice like you were, kind of at a low level with ChatGPT, just in a faculty meeting, get some feedback on it, discuss it at some tables, and then put in some in place for the department or the division, something like that. But I think it's a real good exercise to have faculties talk about this.
And it's still new. Like, this just came out in October, so I think it was October. So like, people, I've been working on it for years, but like, I bet the majority of schools do not know about it. It's so like, I feel like they need to, so they're aware of it, to go like, this kid writes a paper like, whoa, little Johnny just wrote this 2000 article. Like, he's amazing. And you're like, I don't know if that was actually little Johnny that wrote that or not.
Yeah.
I think they need to be aware of it, because I just feel like it's more so, at least from my perspective, in the business sector more than a school sector. Even though schools are bringing it up, going, hey, this is going to be a problem, but if a teacher's not in that circle of people who's talking about it, I wonder if they'll just not know about it, or they'll see it and go, oh, okay, whatever, and just kind of move on and not actually dive into what it is. It did just write me this thing. So for everybody, I haven't read this yet. Told it again, write me a rhyming children's poem about a platypus who looked like a giraffe and is the color pink. Once upon a time, in a land far away, there lived a platypus, pink as can be. He looked quite strange, with a long giraffe neck and webbed feet. Oh, what a unique speck. He waddled and paddled in the cool water streams, with a bill like a duck. It was quite a dream. But his pink coat and spots, they set him apart. He stood out in the crowd, a true work of art. The other animals, they would stare and stare at this platypus pink with a giraffe's hair, but he didn't mind. He was happy and proud to be one of a kind in his own little crowd. So if you ever see a platypus pink with a giraffe's neck and spots that twink, just remember, it's okay to be different and unique, for that's what makes us special. That's what we seek.
I wonder if Dr. Seuss had ChatGPT way back when. Maybe that's why he was so prolific.
Man, because that was like some words I haven't even heard before, and I was just reading myself. What was what I read to him? I read the Lorax last night, and what's the other one? It's really long. I love Sneetches. It's one of my favorite Dr. Seuss books, because it's just like made up words, which I'm like reading these, loving this. I'm like, this is probably not good for a 3-year-old who's learning grammar to be like, these are not real words. So he's going to suddenly start talking about Tweedlebeetles and stuff like that from Fox and Socks. But yeah, there you go. Poem written, crazy poem. It would have taken me all day to write down on my own, and it would have been horrible. So yeah. So Mike, obviously this conversation's been good. I'm hoping people learn something from it. You've been in education for a long time, so I would love to ask you before we sign off, because I ask everybody this that hops on, is if you were to share a piece of advice, it could be about AI or completely separate as a school administrator, what would be the piece of advice you would share with those that are listening?
Yeah, I think this is a perfect situation where, as a school leader, you should be devoting 10% of your time, minimally, but 10% of your time, to thinking far into the future about what your school needs and how things like this might impact your school. That 10% can do a world of good when a crisis hits. So, for instance, in 2015 at my school at Trinity, me and a team of teachers were looking at learning management platforms and building out a learning management platform. We had it. We were operational for about 3 or 4 years. Pandemic hit, and that school just pivoted instantly in a weekend, right? So know what tools are there. You don't have to necessarily use them, but as a school leader, you should be looking onto the horizon. And that's one of the things I love doing with schools in my firm. And I just think that's a skill that has got to be built into school leaders.
Totally agree. You got to be looking forward, or you're going to get surpassed by everybody else who's also looking forward. So love it. Mike, thank you for taking time out of your day to talk about this. This has been fun because I haven't had an episode like this, talk about something new. So I think we're on to something. I think this might be something else. I'll have some guests on. We'll talk a little bit off topic like this because I think it's needed. And I'm hoping that the schools will dive into this, not hide away from it, and at least come up with something of how they want to handle these situations. But appreciate all your years of educating and pouring into students as well as these schools. So wishing you nothing but the best as you continue to do that, Mike.
Thank you, Mitchell. I enjoyed it.
Well, another huge shout out and a thank you to Mike for taking time and being on the podcast today. I love this chat. I know this one was a little bit different, talking about AI and ChatGPT and what's going on in that world. So I hope you guys were able to soak in a little bit of that and do some research, do some digging to see what exactly AI is, where is it going, what does that mean for you and your school and your students. It's a pretty crazy world right now with all of that. So I would love to hear how you guys in your school are handling this. So please reach out to me and let me know. You can honestly just put a comment in one of the social posts that we put out there. You can reach out to us directly. Of course, you can find us online, schoolsuccessmakers.com. That's schoolsuccessmakers.com. Or if you're on the Facebook more, you can join our private Facebook group called School Success Makers. That is School Success Makers on Facebook. I'm personally in there. I'd love to see you in there too. Maybe we start a discussion in there about AI and what your school is doing. That'd be a good start to that. So if your school is looking to grow and you're looking to connect better with your families using technology that's out there, we specialize in that. We love working with schools and helping them grow and use technology to their advantage. So please reach out to us. If you need help with that, we'd love to help your school. All right, guys. Well, hey, that fall semester, it's quickly coming and approaching. So I hope you guys are ready for that. And I hope obviously ready for that summer break that's also quickly approaching in the next 4 months or so. So hang in there. You're almost there. And guys, we'll be back here next time with another amazing guest as usual on the School Success Podcast. We'll see you then.